What do you get when you cross the Atlantic Ocean and the Titanic? You get about halfway. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jasper Binion, and I'm part of Group 3, and this is our informative presentation. We're going to be talking about and informing you about one of the 20th century's early modern wonders, the Titanic. While most of you may know of the ship Titanic and that it struck an iceberg over 104 years ago and sank to the bottom of the ocean, we're going to tell you a little bit about the ship itself, the people on board the ship, and what happened on the night of April 14th, 1912. Did you know, for instance, that the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, was on board the ship when it sank? And he, as they say, went down with the ship. While there is some controversy on whether or not Thomas Andrews was actually the ship's designer, and whether or not the filmmakers in the 1950s made up the story of Mr. Andrews designing the ship and naming it Titanic, and going down with the ship to please the audience expectations, Group 3's research does not focus on controversy. We will be sticking to the facts as we found in our various sources. Again, we're going to be telling you a little bit about the ship, how it was made, people on board, what daily life was like, and what happened on the night of April 14th, 1912. Thank you, and here we go. In the early 20th century, two rival shipping lines found themselves in an intense competition for supremacy as the number one shipping line. One of these was the White Star Line. In 1907, J. Bruce Ismay, chief executive of White Star Line, began discussions with Harland and Wolff, a Belfast-based shipping company. In March 1909, construction began on one of the three ships to be part of the Olympic cruise lines. The ship was the Titanic. On May 31st, 1911, Titanic's immense hull, at the time the largest movable man-made object in the world, made its way down the slipways and into the River Laggan in Belfast, Ireland. It was the world's largest man-made movable object. That's pretty hard to fathom. More than 100,000 people attended the launching of the Titanic's hull, which took just over a minute and went off without a hitch. The hull was immediately towed to a mammoth fitting outdock where thousands of workers would spend building the ship's decks, constructing her lavish interiors, and installing the 29 giant boilers that would power her two main steam engines. Construction continued until completion on March 31st, 1912. It took about 3,000 men to build the ship Titanic. Construction lasted for 3 years, and it cost the modern-day equivalent of $166 million, which oddly enough is less than the cost of the Hollywood movie Titanic with Leonardo DiCaprio, which cost $200 billion. The Titanic cost the modern-day equivalent of $166 billion to build. 8 men were killed during the construction, and there were over 240 injuries. 8 men killed during the construction was widely viewed as very good. When building a ship of that size, you would expect 15 deaths a year. So 8 men killed was widely viewed as very good and very successful. 3 million rivets were used in the construction. It took 20 horses just to transport the main anchor of the ship. Imagine how big an anchor is, and how big an anchor must have been for it to take 20 horses to pull it. Did you know that people say the Titanic was doomed from the start, that there were major design flaws? Several newspapers circulated various articles displaying the design flaws of the Titanic and saying that it was doomed from the beginning. The Titanic was built with a double bottom and 15 watertight sealable compartments, which caused magazines to deem the ship unsinkable. However, while the compartments were watertight, water could spill over top of the compartments and flood the next compartment next to it. So in essence, they were watertight, but they would fill up, spilling over onto the top decks above them, and then coming back down into where they were supposed to be watertight from. The ship was 880 feet and 9 inches long, which was the longest ship built in its time. It weighed over 46,000 tons and was 175 feet high. There were 840 staterooms in all, 416 in first class, 162 in second class, and 262 in third class. How many funnels did the Titanic have? Does anybody know? It had 4 funnels. However, only 3 were functional. The 4th funnel was for ventilation only, and was added for aesthetic reasons to make the ship look more powerful and majestic. The funnels extended high above the deck in order to ensure that passengers were not covered in soot being ejected from the boilers. There were 162 coal-burning furnaces ablaze when all the boilers were working. Titanic stored 6,611 tons of coal in its bunkers and used 825 tons a day. There were 10 decks in total on the Titanic. From top to bottom, they were the boat deck, the promenade deck, deck A, passenger decks B to deck G, OP deck, and the tank top. An interesting fact is that 14,000 gallons of drinking water were used by the Titanic's crew and passengers every day. Imagine a swimming pool and then imagine 14,000 gallons being used every single day. Could you drink a gallon of milk a day? That's a lot of water being drank. Getting a nice adult beverage on board would have been no problem due to the ship having 15,000 bottles of ale, 1,000 bottles of wine, and 850 bottles of liquor on board. The Titanic had lavish features and was deemed the grandest ship of its time. It featured a Turkish bath, swimming pools, lavish staterooms, 2 barber shops, 2 libraries, 3 galleys, 4 restaurants, a gym, and a photographic darkroom. There were 2,223 people on board the Titanic for her maiden voyage, 1,324 passengers, and 908 crew. The route Titanic was supposed to take was from Southampton, England, to Cherbourg, France, over to Queenstown, Ireland, and then to New York, United States. However, the Titanic would only see the ports of Southampton, Cherbourg, and Queenstown. It would never reach New York. The Titanic was outfitted to hold and fit 64 lifeboats. Alexander Carlisle originally planned for the ship to hold 48 lifeboats. However, the ship would only carry the minimum legally allowable amount of lifeboats, which was 20 lifeboats. The 20 boats could have accommodated 1,178 people, around a third of the number on board. Unfortunately, 2 of the collapsible lifeboats simply floated away when the ship sank. One of these lifeboats, 30 passengers were able to stand, sit, or kneel on top of. However, they were unable to turn the boat over and use it properly. The Titanic was outfitted to allow up to 3,547 capacity of crew and guests. Unfortunately, only 2,222 were actually on board. In first class, there were 324 passengers, 284 in second class, and 709 passengers in third class. Colonel John Jacob Astor IV was the wealthiest person on board, and believed to be one of the richest persons in the world of his time, with a personal fortune that was estimated at between 90 and 150 million, which today would make him a billionaire a few times over. Astor died in the sinking of the Titanic, however, and his body was picked up by another ship. The youngest passenger on board the Titanic was only 2 months old and 13 days. She survived the sinking. The oldest person on board was 74 years old, 10 months and 29 days, but sadly perished in the sinking. White Star Line's managing director J. Bruce Ismay and the ship's Harland and Wolff designer Thomas Andrews, as mentioned before, were both on board the ship to see its progress on her maiden voyage. Some other notable passengers were Benjamin Guggenheim, Macy's department store owner and member of the United States House of Representatives, Isidor Straus, George Dimmick Wick, Vice President of Pennsylvania Railroad John Thayer, millionaire, philanthropist, and women's rights activist Margaret Brown, and President William Howard Taft's military aide, Major Archibald Butt. If you enjoy Hershey's Kisses and other Hershey's candies, which are some of my favorite candies, be glad that Milton S. Hershey, founder of Hershey's Chocolate, made plans to sail on the Titanic. However, he canceled at the last minute. Edward Smith was the captain of the Titanic and a notable sea captain for the White Star Line. He unfortunately went down with the ship. On April 11, 1912, the Titanic set sail from Queenstown, Ireland, en route to New York, USA. On the night of April 14, 1912, at around 11:40 p.m., the Titanic tried to avoid an iceberg. However, the iceberg struck the Titanic and tore a hole in the side of its hull. Approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes later, the broken ship slipped beneath the surface of the ocean, en route to its final destination on the bottom of the ocean. The ship, when it sank, was only 400 miles away from Cape Race, Newfoundland. Titanic had been receiving iceberg and ice field warnings all day long during the last day of its voyage and life. However, several of the final warnings were never passed on to Captain Smith, who had retired to dine with guests and to sleep in his stateroom. The radio room was operated by not employees of the White Star Line, but rather of the Macaroni Company, and their main responsibility was to the guests and sending messages for the guests. At 11 p.m., the California, another ship in the area, passed a message to the Titanic and other ships saying it had stopped sailing for the night due to ice fields. However, the Titanic's radio operator sent back a message to California saying, "Shut up, I'm busy." He was busy because he was sending messages for guests because of a back order, because earlier the ship's radio was broken. Little did he know when he sent that message that the iceberg was only 15 miles ahead. At 11:39 p.m., the men in the crow's nest, which is a lookout on the main mast, saw the iceberg, but it was too late to avoid a collision. At 11:40 p.m., alerted by the crow's nest, Assistant Captain Murdoch on the bridge demanded that the engines be put into reverse and the ship steered away from the iceberg. However, the Titanic hits the iceberg and it struck the starboard side. It was not until 12 a.m. that Captain Smith ordered distress signals be sent out. The California, the ship that they told to shut up, was a mere 20 miles away and had already shut down its radio room and did not hear the calls. If it had, the California could have reached the Titanic before it sank. But can you imagine if you were the radio operator and you were told to shut up? Would you want to keep your radio on? I wouldn't either. 20 minutes later, the loading of the lifeboats was ordered. So at 12:20 a.m., Captain Smith ordered the loading of the lifeboats with passengers. Many guests were still unaware of any damage to the ship and thought that the loading of the lifeboats was a simple drill. At 12:25, the Carpathia, a ship 58 miles away, responds to Titanic's distress signals and says they are on the way to help. However, it would take about 4 hours to reach them. At 12:45, more than 30 minutes after the loading of the lifeboats had been ordered, the first lifeboat is finally launched, and it was carrying only 28 passengers. It could have held up to 65. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic slips beneath the waters on its final journey to its ultimate home port, the bottom of the ocean floor. At 4:10 a.m., the Carpathia arrives on the scene and starts retrieving passengers from lifeboats. 705 passengers were collected from the lifeboats and water. Roughly 1,522 victims are believed to be lost at sea. The Titanic was traveling at 22.5 knots when it struck the iceberg, causing an estimated 220 to 245 foot gash in the starboard side of the ship's hull. It is estimated the actual opening of which water was coming in was only about 12 cubic feet. Titanic was taking on approximately 400 tons of water per minute. 38,000 tons of water approximately filled the bow of the ship, causing the ship to come out of the water bow first, stern in the air, bow going down. The seawater was about 28 degrees Fahrenheit at its lowest temperature, and it's estimated that it may have been between 28 degrees and 31 degrees when passengers were falling overboard into the water that night. The life expectancy for victims in the water was anywhere between 15 and 45 minutes. The wreck of the Titanic lies at a depth of approximately 2.4 miles below the surface. The wreck of the Titanic was finally located in 1985 on the 1st of September. She was discovered by an American-French team led by Robert Ballard and John Lewis Michael, and using the remote-controlled deep-sea submersible Argo. Come quick! Stop. Engine room nearly full. Stop. This was the last message sent by Jack Phillips from the Titanic before it sank. Jack Phillips was notably very heroic during his time on the Titanic for staying in the radio room and sending messages out the entire time of the sinking. The other radio operators on various ships noted that his hands never wavered. There was never any change in his pace or rhythm when sending the Morse code messages. Come quick, engine room nearly full, was the last message Jack Phillips would ever send. The Titanic was seen and thought of as an unsinkable ship. However, on the night of April 14, 1912, it sank, taking with it to the bottom of the ocean approximately 1,522 victims. Many famous people of their time were on board and tragically did not survive, as well as many others. There are many heroic accounts told by survivors of both crew members and passengers' actions during Titanic's final moments. Titanic's demise has taken on a deeper, almost mythical meaning in popular culture. Many view the tragedy as a morality play of humans and human hubris. Titanic's creator believed they had built an unsinkable ship that could not be defeated by the laws of nature. The same overconfidence explains the electrifying impact Titanic's sinking had on the public when she was lost. People are still fascinated with the Titanic and its story. I hope you learned a little today about the Titanic, from where it was built and how, to where it set sail from, some of the famous passengers on board, various accommodations on board, and the events that led to its unfortunate sinking. I leave you with this. Not only were 705 victims saved from the tragedy, 2 dogs also survived the ordeal, which is oddly silly when you think about it because the lifeboats had a capacity of 40, were only carrying 12 people. So the people made it a priority to save 2 dogs, but not people. Maybe if Captain Smith had not canceled the lifeboat drills the afternoon of the sinking, the crew would have been more prepared and better trained and ready to properly fit the lifeboats with the passengers they required. Thank you for your time.